All right, this is 160, part 2 of the Intro to the Garden series.
Are you recording?
I am.
Hello and welcome to the Hole in My Heart podcast. This is episode 160, an introduction to the Garden series, part 2.
Hello, welcome. I'm your host, Laurie Krieg, and I am with my favorite licensed therapist, Argyle expert, and my husband, Matt Krieg. Matt, welcome.
Hi.
Hey, by the way, Argyle expert, why do we call him that? It's because he wears Argyle because he's a nerd. An adorable nerd. But he's not really an expert in all things Argyle, but we'll just say he is because that's your intro. But we also have the most professional radio voice among us, producer Steve.
Hi, guys.
Hey, and we call him the most professional voice because he is. Okay, guys, before we get rolling today, I just want to invite you to rate and review the podcast if you appreciate what we got going on here and you'd like others to find it. Thank you. And hit up the iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get it. I don't know, Google it, and then find the ways you can rate and review. It just means a ton, and we do read them, and they're very encouraging, and they do help others find us. Okay, we are excited. It's part 2 of our series. If you guys missed last week, we're going to do a little bit of a recap on this new garden series as we're unpacking this Oneness Mountain, which if you guys haven't read our book, An Impossible Marriage, that's chapter 5 is where we intro it and we keep unpacking it throughout the book. But we really, with this series, wanted to put some more legs on it. Our friends, some of our friends who've read our book, they're like, I think that's your second book, that you guys need to unpack that. So I'm not making any promises. We're just trying to explore this metaphor that we believe God gave us and share it with you all. And today, the focus of an unpacking the Oneness Mountain and the gardens of relating is to take it really practical, and how Matt and I actually use this in our real lives and how we're learning to help it to be the framework with which we see our real lives. Before we dive back in and do a little review from last week, I wanted to hit the question of the week from last week, which this might be my favorite question of the week we've ever done. Here it is. If you were a potato, how would you like to be cooked? And what's to say about your personality? I added that on when I asked people. Matt, I'm throwing it to you first as per usual. Potato.
Potato. Yeah.
Hey. Does anyone actually say potato? Probably not in the United States and the West Michigan.
Yeah, I really liked what Mark had to say on Facebook. He said, out of a potato cannon so I can leave this world with a boom. Not exactly a cooked potato, but it's amazing.
I love that.
Just do it.
It's amazing. And I would say, for myself, I would say potatoes au gratin because I'm cheesy.
All right, I don't know. You are a bit, but not really.
No, I don't know. There's a lot of things.
He can be pretty
I
cheesy.
can be pretty cheesy.
Yeah, you
but
can be.
I guess maybe mashed potatoes because they can be very cheesy, but they don't have to be.
There it is.
And they're just
Comforting.
They're great, and you can put bacon in them. And I can put bacon in me. Huzzah! Found it.
Okay, Steve, shifting.
Yep. I loved this comment. It was from Amy. She said, I'd like to be French fries because they're fun and everybody likes them, and I can be a little salty.
Hey.
Yeah. I mean, she clarified in the sassy sense of the word, not angry and bitter.
Oh, I love
salty.
it all.
Yes. Love it. For myself, I thought about couch potato first, but then I was like, you don't cook those, do you? And your question specifically had to do with how you cook the potato. So, and also that's a little too on the nose for me. So I went with the baked because I love wrapping myself in tinfoil. I don't know. I do like the idea of just sitting in heat, like a sauna. It's very relaxing. Plus, I'm pretty easygoing. Whatever you throw at me, whatever kind of topping you want to put on there, whether it's chives or bacon bits, sour cream, or maybe just a pat of butter, I'll roll with whatever. So I went with baked.
Steve butters himself. Okay.
It gets baked.
I like this from Jake. He said, how I'm cooked says less about my personality than the fact that I am a sweet potato. Enough said. that just somehow the way you wrote it and said it, it made me feel like the same warm fuzzies I get watching a Pixar movie where you're like, I'm wiping away a tear and I'm laughing and I feel warmth in my heart. So I just liked that answer. Thanks, Jake. I would go with, I think, sweet potato fries because A, you're never really sure what you're going to dip them in. So they're a little like,
Yeah.
is it ketchup? I needed an aioli, but here I am sitting in my house and I just dumped the Costco bag on a pan and baked it at 425. So it's, they're good. They're a little healthy and you're kind of sometimes annoyed by that and you don't know what it goes with all the time. So I feel like that's kind of my personality. It's like, all right, it's good. Okay, now that I've done a self-assessment of how I feel about myself in this moment.
Via potato.
Via potato. Still, I really think this ranks highly. Don't you guys think as far as questions
it's
of
a
the
good
week?
one.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Sadly, we are taking a break from questions of the week for this series. I know, but I wanted to really be able to dive in with our guests. And there's just a lot of, I think, some splaining to do. Who's that? Ricky Ricardo. That we're going to do at the beginning of each episode so that we can really dive in deeply. So sorry, question of the week. You're taking a little break, but we're not taking a break from our garden series. So Matt, can you, before we even dive into, why we're doing this necessarily, can you just help us understand? We've said the word garden already at least 10 times. Help us understand what's the garden series and where did it develop from? Why are we talking about this?
Yeah, so the garden metaphor, the garden series, this is all about what we call the gardens of relating. And this is something that we developed as we were having a conversation in our kitchen about how we break down our lives into, I guess, more tangible ways that we can talk about them, because so much of life, it's like all of life is terrible or all of life is great. And it's like, no, there is nuance there.
And we were really trying to answer the question, what is oneness? Or what is true intimacy? When we were having issues with physical intimacy, it really forced the question, what is even life? And
who are we?
Who are we? And what is oneness? Is it
Yeah.
just this, climax of sex, or are there other areas how we can feel intimacy?
Yeah, and so to look at, and this came out of our desire to look at oneness more holistically rather than as this kind of just fade to black sex.
Yeah. And it's like, what the heck? Then I look at single people. I always single people listening. I always have you in my mind.
She always singles you out.
No, I always pair you with us because I'm like, okay, well, if that's the ultimate form of intimacy, then what about single people? Help me understand. Okay. So sitting in our kitchen, chatting away, looking at, life has lots of different aspects. Help us understand the different aspects, or what we call gardens.
So yeah, the 7 gardens of relating are intellectual, the way we think about things, our physical garden, our physical body, emotional garden, or feelings, thoughts, spiritual, social, stewardship, which is how we utilize the resources that God has gifted us with, our talents, our possessions, all that kind of stuff. And then our family garden, the way that we direct our family and interact on a family level.
And we see these 7 gardens of relating as on a mountain. And how we said it last week, there's like, if the body of Christ, picture like a gingerbread man, and you zoom in on the toe, and there's like a cell there, and that's Matt and I. And it's like a cell is actually a mountain with these 7 gardens on it. And Matt and I are living there on the mountain with our 7 gardens of relating, and we're trying to figure out how to garden these things together. And why is it a garden? Because we are called as believers to bear much fruit. So we want to have each of these places as healthy and as growing and as full as possible, so that we can bear much fruit and not just eat it for ourselves, although that's not none of it, but to toss it down the mountain. It's on a plane. It's moving down in order to feed back into the body of Christ, like it says in Ephesians, that God puts all the parts of the body together. Each part does its own special work. It helps the other parts grow so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. So we want to, Matt and I are on the same mountain because we're married, but if you're single, you're on your own mountain. But there's a mountain range around you. You have a community around you that we're not so good at as the church. We all know that. So, Matt, we're throwing another layer into this whole thing. Guys, there are pictures of what we're talking about on lauriekrieg.com, and you can just click on the podcast episode page 160 or 159. We also had it there. But, Matt, we talk a lot about core needs. First of all, what are core needs? And all right, I guess I'm grasping this, concept, zoom in on the body of Christ. It's actually like you guys on this little cell there or on the toe of a mountain. You got these gardens, you got to cultivate them. What are you talking about core needs?
So core needs are good God-given needs that have been instilled in us to direct us into proper relationship with Him, but also to direct us into relationship with one another. And so those were things that were created in the beginning. These are not signs of weakness. These are not signs of imperfection. This is a thing that God has created us with and created us for. And so we're talking about things like to be affirmed, overwhelmingly approved of, to be desired, to be included and loved and nurtured. Things like purpose and rest, to be delighted in, to be protected, to be noticed and seen.
This won't be the first time our audience hears this list. Again, it's in our Impossible Marriage book. It's also in our Journey Well study, also on our site. And we've done a whole series on core needs. So, and we also have this list. If you want to read more, we'll have that on the site as well. Again, lauriekrieg.com, episode 160. Matt, how do they factor into this picture, though?
So, and that's the beautiful thing. Okay, every garden will need water. It needs nutrition. It needs something to be added to it in order to allow that fruit that we're trying to cultivate to grow. And so the beautiful thing about water, if you think about it, like it's all from God. If you imagine the Holy Spirit being like the rain the Holy Spirit sends rain on the wicked and the righteous alike. All of this originates with God. And so when we talk about our needs, ultimately God is the origination, the source that we can meet those needs with. However, He also puts people and relationship in our lives to be kind of conduits, to be avenues that His rain comes to us.
So they could have like a little rain. What is that called?
Pail?
What am I doing with my hands? A pail?
Watering pail?
Watering can. Wow. Okay. So they can pour onto our gardens as well. But where did that water come from? It didn't come from.
Yeah, they didn't create it.
No. I was going to say that it's spit into it, hopefully, when they're pouring it onto your garden. But it's all, so if we picture the mountain, all these 7 different gardens, again, you can find a picture of it on our site. You see the rain coming down that's from the Holy Spirit, and it's gardening these places, or it's filling up these places. It's grabbing the nutrients and going back down the mountain. And we can have our own watering cans and, pass the water along. But Matt, we talked last week. So we call them core needs streams. And so from God, so it's like maybe there's like in each of the 7 gardens, I'm going to do math, so bear with
70.
me, guys. Just don't skip to the answer. 7 gardens. In each of them, there's 10 streams that come from God with each of the needs. So, this need to be included flows through the garden, need to be loved and nurtured and purposed and rested. So each one gets received from God and goes through each garden and filters back down as it picks up the nutrients. But Matt, let's say you and I are hanging out in the social garden and I'm not feeling very seen or noticed. Let's say we're hanging out with some friends and there's a barricade. Maybe you're talking over me. I cannot even imagine this happening. But let's say you're talking over.
How dare you say that?
over me. And I'm not feeling very seen or noticed. So it's not a matter of God's noticing me isn't coming down the mountain. It's that there's a barrier. So let's talk about some of those barriers. So, we have actually 4. And last week we just talked about 3, but I did want to add in that 4th one. But Matt, will you start with rocks? So let's picture ourselves in the social garden, hanging out. Maybe we're on a date. Maybe we're on a double date. I got like my 1950s shoulders going on if you guys are watching the video right now, because I don't know why. Matt, help me. Rocks. Can you start with rocks? That might be a barrier from me receiving, cultivating fruit or receiving some of this feeling noticed from God while we're hanging out in the social garden.
Yeah. So the rocks would be the sins that were done to us, the things that were placed in our lives by other people, or effects of the fall. They are unchosen things. They are, they're rocks, so they are very, very sturdy. It's not something that you just like pick up and move around.
So let's throw it into the example real quick. So let's say we're hanging out, double date, you and me, I'm not feeling noticed. And you may actually not be running over me with your words. You are actually trying your best. But I have a rock in my life called I don't ever feel seen by anyone in a group because my dad didn't notice me and my mom. And this is just, I haven't grieved it. This is not my real life. Just sharing this. But I have this rock in my life of this pain from my parents. And so I'm just crossing my arms, at least inside, because I don't feel seen and noticed. That would be a rock, right?
Yes, because that is something that happened to you. It was instilled in you. And then you react to it as opposed to something that you are actively choosing.
Okay. Next up, weeds. Weeds, how would that look? What is it, and how might that look in our imaginary situation?
Yeah, so weeds are kind of our own tendencies, our own sin tendencies, the things that we will typically choose to run to. I mean, we don't necessarily choose that thing that we are tempted with, but we're choosing to pursue them or not. So the things that we have a choice whether we engage in are sin tendencies. So it could be lust. It could be like the consumption of things, the acquisition of things, greed. It can be, all sorts of ways that this can go. But we have our tendencies that we have an active ability to choose or not choose to pursue.
Ooh.
But they are the weeds that might continually have to be like plucked out of the garden.
So in our scenario, double date, I'm feeling unseen by you, Matt, as a man because my dad didn't notice me. So that rock's still hanging out there. Well, I'm going to start trying to catch the eye of someone else in the room so that I can feel seen. And it's not, are we going to get into the nuance of is God seeing me through that person? If it's sin, it's not going to be really from God. But let's just say I'm doing that. I'm just trying to get that need met in my own little corner over here by this person over here looking and seeing me and noticing me. Or you brought your own special variety of weeds into, you hear how I'm trying to add the S?
Add the S, yeah.
Thank you. Into our marriage mountain, our Oneness Mountain in this garden. And so again, you may run over me. You may be adding in your own issues. Any ideas or examples that you might throw in there, Matt?
Are you saying in that scenario, of me running over you? It could be something where I am posturing, I am trying to gain the attention of the people we're with, or just wanting to, like, the need to be heard, or the need to be affirmed. And so I'm going to talk over everyone and get the laugh and make sure that I'm the focus of attention.
So I'm feeling unseen. I have, this rock in my life in this area. And then Matt, maybe you have your own rock your knees are bumping into. Invisible, but we're still, maybe the real life is in the garden, but we're living in the Matrix life with these friends. If you're under 20 years old, you don't know the Matrix, but likely. But you would be bumping into, let's say your dad would only pay attention to you if you were, self-aggrandizing and you were really loud. And so you're bumping into that. You're not really feeling affirmed. I'm feeling cut off. You can imagine that after this double date that was supposed to be this awesome social garden cultivating moment, we're in pain and maybe don't even know why. All right, let's talk about mold. Go ahead, Matt.
So mold is kind of the stuff that festers. It's the stuff that will grow in the dark if left unchecked. And this is one of the ways that the enemy really likes to play on our circumstance. So it could be something where out of this interaction on the double date, like if both of us are feeling somewhat angsty, if you're feeling like I didn't see you, and I'm feeling like, well, you didn't laugh enough at my jokes and you seemed a little bit standoffish or whatever, that if left unchecked, that can grow like seeds of bitterness, like that mold, bitterness, resentment toward one another, or just like okay, I'm going to cloister myself off and I'm just going to stew in this dark space.
And it can also be where lies grow up there, right? Like the lies just make it worse. And so it's like, well, Matt never will love me. So instead of on the way home, in a kind way, hey, Matt, I felt this when you blah. And Laurie, I felt this when you blah, which that in our Impossible Marriage workshops we talk about how to communicate that way. But if we are unwilling to see, okay, here we are, we're supposed to be having this fun time, but we're bumping into our pasts. We didn't realize it. We're inadvertently, with our weeds, with our sin tendencies, we're choosing self. And then we're cutting off, I don't want to say we're cutting off the ability for us to feel God's need meeting in us, because that's putting too much power on the other person, but we're not helping. We're not helping each other. So ideally we'd have a conversation on the car ride home. Hey, when you did this, it made me feel this, to be able to clarify and really kind of get a sense of what was really going on. Oh man, well, I was just really feeling triggered. You're seeming just like my dad. Well, you're just like my mom. Okay, well, let's not do that. The last area is a broken fence. What's that, Matt?
So this is the fence that when, well, if you are married, there is a fence that goes up around the mountain saying that this relationship that we have on this mountain is different and set apart. And so the broken fence would be a covenant break. It would be hopping off of that mountain or inviting someone else into that space to kind of usurp, to take the space that your spouse has got in your life.
Or if you're single, that God has in your life. If I'm always thinking this, when I'm having conversations with other people in my world, but they're called to celibacy and singleness, they'll joke about or say things, oh man, that person's so cute, I'm just going to flirt a little bit, it feels so good. I don't have an exact answer, but I do have a question to that is, well, if you're married to Jesus, is that okay? Like to do that flirting, especially with someone that you're like genuinely attracted to and they're someone of the same sex, or like to do this kind of like, it sounds like hanging out with lust. I just am asking the question, like if I can't do it in my marriage, because it'd be definitely violating my marriage to Matt, I guess I'm just asking the question, can single people, like, is that cool? Like, are we married? Like I'm married to Jesus too, but you're married to Jesus too, but I have this covenant thing. I'm just asking the question. So covenant break. And that might look like in our double date, what I was doing in my mind, like, oh, I'm just going to catch that person's eye. I'm going to whatever, let anything happen in my heart. That's just where I'm isolating. It's like I break off the broken fence. I break the covenant fence off of around our mountain. And I'm like, I'm just going to hang out over here. Bye.
Well, and I would honestly go maybe even a step further and say, okay, if Ephesians 5, two becoming one flesh, if that is the oneness representation, that we are supposed to represent the oneness between Christ and the church, this covenant break can also be anything that detracts from that oneness.
Ooh.
And so that could be sitting in fantasy. Like even if you're not actively seeking out, relationship with someone, that could be sitting and saying, well, I'm not going to get that here, so I'm just going to withdraw into my own little fantasy world where I can have my stuff and I can take care of myself and I can watch my sports and I can read my romance novels. It doesn't have to be necessarily
even lustful. It's just
lust
not
is one
oneness.
avenue. Lust is one of the avenues that we can break that. It could be, and we'll get into this maybe if we go directly. Well, how about we jump into the stewardship garden?
Okay.
If let's say we have a goal and we've prayed about it and we've set like, okay, a financial goal like that. Hey, we want to pay off this amount of debt, or we want to save for whatever, kids' college, or even as a single person, if you are saying I want to do the same thing, it could be a broken covenant for someone to go and to secretly get fast food on the way home, or to, spend $20 more than what the limit was on that pair of jeans, or something, because that is saying, oh, well, I hear what we chose, but I am actually going to do this because this is what I want.
Ouch. And I again, we were talking before recording, what this metaphor does is it puts a framework and language to what we intrinsically feel. And so when I think about that, Matt, when you or I have been like, okay, we got a budget, we got to save. And then it's like, what's that Amazon package? You're like, we needed it. Did you? You know, but not even just that moment, but inside it just feels like, I shouldn't have done that. Or if as a single person, you know, you do the same thing. You're like, okay, I've committed to saving this much money. I have my communities holding me to it, and me and the Lord decided this. And then you break it. Then it's like, that intrinsic is that covenant break. Is that it's not oneness. And that's what this whole Oneness Mountain is, this unity. Ideally, if you're married, it's you and Jesus and your spouse. Y'all are working in community. All right, this one needs it. You guys are synchronized. And the same if you're a single person, it's like you're here and you and Jesus have this conversation and you are working together to produce much fruit. Okay. I still have a lot of stuff we still have to go over. So I am going to probably throw some of this up on the episode page, but I'm going to summarize the next bit of it and then we'll dive deep into a portion. So I want to go through how we use this in our single or singular self. So whether or not you're single and your marital status or just as a married person as yourself, we need to regularly assess these areas of our life. We need to assess and then engage. So what I mean by that is, again, we're probably already intrinsically doing this. Singular assessment with the capital G Gardner might be called your quiet time. Now, here's a way, and Matt, maybe we'll end up writing like a journal or something where you could go through this. That might be a good idea. But to go through each garden. So here's how it might sound. This is the assessment part as a singular human being. How am I doing in the social garden? Like just kind of thinking through your own self. Am I hanging out with other people in the mountain range around me? And am I having fun with God? Intellectual. Are you learning about him? You know, it's so interesting because you can think about different people. Maybe you know that like really emphasize the mind and studying with God. And you might pish posh them, and you might emphasize. Matt's doing a face that's his more emphasis. Or you know people who with the Lord they're really just lamenting and emotional with the Lord. Neither's better. These are just both areas we got to cultivate with him. So to go through that, the physical, how are you doing in your physical self? Are you inviting him into running with him? That's what I like to do. I'm like, I got to go run with Jesus, which taps for me like the emotional garden, and spiritual for sure. Emotional, just talked about stewardship. How is it going? How are you using your time, gifts, and talents and money? Family garden, praying through your actual family, seeing God as Father, seeing others as your siblings. Spiritual, that kind of goes without saying, but like, how are you cultivating your spiritual life? Reading the Bible, devotions, prayer. And so go through those and then ask God, where are we producing fruit? What areas need to produce more fruit? And then again, this might be this is like quiet time ultimate. It seems like. So maybe there's a pared down version on the regular for your 15-minute or whatever you're doing. But like even with the Lord, again, singularly looking at you and God, assessing these areas of your life. But then core needs, asking, what do I need, God? And are you seeing him as the need meter? Maybe going through the needs list and just feeling with him, sitting with him. And then the third place, so we talked about thinking through the gardens with him, working the gardens, assessing them with him, assessing the core needs, and then asking him what barriers are in place. This is huge. Ooh, this is so search my heart and know me. Point out any ways that are, in violation between you and me. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing the psalmist, David. The rocks, weeds, mold, broken fence. I feel like I need to do this as I read it. So singularly as single people, or as singularly as in our marriage, going through those three areas. So that's the assessment of our Oneness Mountain in each of these gardens. Then there's the engagement of the Oneness Mountain. That is when you are on mission. You know, you are volunteering and you're activating these different areas, the physical garden, the emotional, the spiritual, or giving to others, or in your job. It's this, how can you increase intimacy, is another word we could use for oneness, with the Father in your life. Then you come back and you assess. So there's the engagement and the assessment. Anything you would add to that, Matt?
Well, I feel like I have stuff to add
Later.
for later. So
Okay.
just, get through the explanation piece.
Okay. I'm moving on to married selves. What's that? Those areas that I just talked about assessing, you're probably not going to pull out a checklist, or your spouse is going to leave the table. Not you. Just saying, maybe a little intimidated. But maybe even before you go on your date night, which I really encourage that, even right now in COVID. In Michigan, we've been shut down for no less than 17 years. Okay, so we've been shut down for so long. No restaurants are open unless you want to sit outside, and it's 10 degrees outside. That's not going to happen. But Matt and I, we really try to check in once a week in a home date. Well, after this, usually after the podcast, we're going to go get pizza somewhere and we'll go home and chat. And it's not going to be this intense. But if before you even meet, Matt's saying, thank you, Jesus, you just think, okay, if you think, man, I'm mad at them, I don't really feel close. Instead of just staying there and being like, well, I don't know, I'm just mad, you're stupid. Maybe go through this list and think, okay, which area is feeling depleted? Which area is hurting right now between us? Where don't I feel close? And then think about, okay, is it a need that's not being met? Oh, maybe it's this. Oh, are there barriers? Is it me? Is it I don't know exactly. That will help so much if you come with like a sort of close diagnosis, like, hey, this is what's hurting. Again, your tone matters, how you say it. But instead of like, I don't know, I just don't feel close. I don't know. I don't know. Matt, as a dude, stereotypically, we women can run emotional circles around you. If I was to come to you and be like, hey, this is, I'm not really feeling close, and didn't start it with, we need to talk. What was like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. How would that make you feel?
A couple things. I'm always scared.
Okay.
Emotionally, I'm always like, oh no, what's happening?
Anytime talking happens.
Anytime the talking happens, I'm a little bit nervous. No, but I think starting it and having a tangible thing, like, hey, I'm not feeling close. Here is why, is helpful. Because if I'm let's say I am feeling close and I'm like, yeah, we've played games the last couple of nights and we've had people over and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff.
You smacked my butt in the kitchen.
Yeah, like you hugged me and smacked my butt in the kitchen. And it's like, I'm feeling great. But because my focus might not naturally be on that emotional garden or on that intellectual garden or stewardship, whichever one, to have a way of saying like, I'm not feeling close here.
Oh yeah.
Because that doesn't mean that I'm not feeling close at all or our whole relationship is terrible. It's just, I need to tend this garden. I need you to tend this garden with me.
Yes.
And so it becomes much more of an inviting, like, hey, I would like to talk because I want to develop closeness, not we need to talk because I need to tell you how terrible you are.
Okay. And light bulb. Remember Kurt Thompson back in the day, a bunch of months ago? We had him on at the beginning of this series, of this season, and he said those words. He said, if in your life you are focused on the problem, your brain, so he's a neurologist, I don't know. He's an MD of the brainular area. And he said, your brain's just going to shut down. It's going to go to fight or flight. It's just going to be like, no, I don't want to talk about this. But if you focus on what you can cultivate together, that lights up a whole different area of your brain and you want to engage. And so, guys, if you as a couple or as an individual with your friends, you just keep slamming your head into these impossible areas of, man, I just don't know why we're not connecting, but we just can't diagnose it. I don't know. Try this. Just try and put your life into these different sections. And Matt, I love that you highlighted that, because I know in conversations between us, that's something you've brought up, is you're like, it feels like you're saying our whole life is garbage. And I'm like, oh no, it's just over here. But I haven't even had that language until the last year when God gave us this vision.
Yeah. And I want to jump in and emphasize, this is something that married people, obviously we are explaining kind of how that has happened in our marriage. But single people, you can do this to yourself, where if you are looking at your life and your needs, and sometimes it's like you get into your head like that you need to berate yourself to be better and be focused on the problem. Like, well, why can't you take care of your finances? Why are you always making this mistake? Oh, stupid. And it's much more helpful to have like this invitational, grace-filled approach, even to yourself, to just say, okay, you know what? I messed that up, but hey, here's the reason I'm getting back up. Here's the reason I am on this budget. Here's the reason I'm taking care of myself physically. Here's the reason that it's important for me to identify my emotions.
What was that, Matt? What did you say?
That it's important for me to identify my emotions because they're there. And I'm not supposed to be stoic to them. I'm not supposed to just be passive and wait for them to all be sunshine and roses. Like, that doesn't happen. It takes work.
I love it. So I'm going to briefly hit the second part of this. And Matt, I'm so glad that you are bringing up single people too, who are equally valuable, and God calls people to singleness. But in this married subhead, so we just talked about assessing, and then the engagement of the Oneness Mountain. So we're doing this all the time. It's called Saturday morning. If you guys have a weekend, it's what do you want to do today? Intrinsically, we are assessing inside without this map, without thinking about it, areas that feel weak, feel overgrown, that we haven't cultivated. Well, I would love to see a movie. Why? Because you need some fun, and you could probably dive into the core need of that. Maybe it's rest inside the social garden, or, I really need the emotional. Well, I would love to connect with you. Just love to have a good conversation, get some coffee. So the emotional garden, would love to feel seen. So, I just think it's just helpful for me to have language so that when we run into moments in our marriage, in our friendships, in ourselves, with our walk with God, Matt, I know you and I have skirted out of a fight when I think we're talking about what we're going to do in the weekend. And you're like, well, I think that we need to blah, blah, blah. All I heard was, you don't love me. And it was that you were hanging out in the stewardship garden and a brother wanted to save money. And I'm like, but I want to go. I'm in the social garden screaming over for you. Please come play with me. And why does money matter so much? Why can't you spend it all on me and diamonds and gold? No, I'm kidding. I'm not that girl, but maybe sometimes I am. Okay. But I remember distinctly we just stopped. And I was like, wait a minute. You're in the stewardship garden, aren't you? You're like, I want to save money. And I was like, well, I'm in the social garden. And then I said, will you be willing to come play with me in the social garden this weekend? And you're like, okay. But there's times where it's vice versa, where I'm like, yep, you're right. We did agree to that spending whatever limit. So, all right, we'll do that. Is there another way we could also cultivate this social garden? Okay, last area I want to talk about very briefly, and maybe this is more just to highlight, I don't know, maybe just throw questions out to you guys, the listeners. Just how does this work with the church? Like, this is honestly where my mind has gone, and even thinking about this podcast episode is I'm like, okay, as a single person, to be so one with God that you are like, where are you cultivating, God? Where are you moving? Not so that you can just hang out in your lush, beautiful Oneness Mountain with God. Not that it's not that, but it's not only that. It's that so you can bear much fruit, and so that you can pour it back into the body of Christ, and so that you can activate each garden as you're on mission and serving God. Then if God's called you to marriage, and you got your own rocks and weeds and seeds and defaults toward covenant break, and then you're trying to cultivate it together, truly, guys, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, I'm like, this picture has given me such a sense of why marriage is so stinking hard. And then also at the same time, why singleness is so stinking hard, because that could be lonely. Like I always got Matt on the mountain with me, which is great. But I always got Matt on the mountain with me, which can be hard. And vice versa, right, Matt? But
Yes.
then you think about John 17, where Jesus says, may they be one, just as you and I are one. And then you look around, you're like literally, I mean, we're barely hanging on here. You kidding me? As myself, or with me and my spouse. And I'm supposed to be like the three, me and Matt and Jesus working together. And then, oh, okay, we have this community around us and we're all bearing fruit together in this synchronized way. Are you kidding me? So I think, again, we need assessment. How we doing as a church? And then we need engagement. Are we activating this oneness where we're bearing much fruit? And I'm not going to lie, in my community, I don't think we're doing so hot. We got some work to do. We got some good, great work. But I'm saying the church in general, we got some work to do. I'd like to hear you guys' thoughts on that. I'd like to hear if there are any places where you guys are really right now, right in Rona life. How's it going with your cultivating oneness as a church? We don't have a question of the week, but I would like to hear your response on that. Matt, I know you had maybe at least a thought or two that you wanted to add to this. Please go.
Yes. And actually, I'm glad you brought up, Rona. You brought up the pandemic, because this is something that I feel like I've been having conversations with people a lot recently, especially those that are single, is loneliness.
Oh, boy.
So just, and if you were taking the garden language, when I hear the word loneliness, I immediately think of the core need belonging.
Yep.
And oftentimes. Or included. Yeah. To be included, to belong. And I will often tie that to, okay, especially in this social garden.
Oh, boy.
And so here we're at this place where we have needs that are in seeming conflict with one another. The need to belong, the need to be included, and the need for safety, the need to be protected. And here we are.
Explain the safety one. Why? Oh, because of Rona.
In the pandemic, where it's like this high emphasis on safety, on protection, on like, hey, we need to be stewards of how we handle our interactions with one another. We don't want to, spread the virus. But it has to be balanced in the fact that like there are people who are desperately isolated. And as a church, we can't just go willy-nilly either way. We have to hold these two things as both intrinsic needs to be protected. We don't just say, hey, mask off, everyone, we're going to play lick tag. No, we're not doing that. But we also can't just say, hey, and for the sake of protecting everyone, no one will ever have any gatherings whatsoever with people, because
it'll die.
That whole like social garden, that need to be included, to be a part of the body. The first time something was not good in this world was when God said it is not good for man to be alone.
Yeah.
And so there is a high weight to that inclusion, to that just belonging together, to that interaction. And so I think we as a church need to do better at being creative and being willing within the bounds of safety, like not to just throw that away again, but to be cultivating and opening up spaces, especially for single people who have been feeling more of the effects of isolation than most married people.
Yes.
Because they don't have people that they're necessarily coming home to. And we need to be a body. And so I guess my challenge is be the body, allow, even if it means like, hey, masking up, trying to sit apart, but, inviting someone into your home and being present with them.
I love it. Guys, do you have any thoughts, any questions on this? Any thoughts on what Matt's saying on this challenge? How have you done that to invite people to hold intention that need to be both safe and to belong? And then, too, to let us know any churches that are doing well, any church communities. And I don't know, it's so hard. I feel so bad for pastors right now, but maybe your church has shifted. Maybe it's more small group focused. I'm very curious about that. So let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Guys, if you want to learn more about this, keep listening to the series. We're not going to keep necessarily going back to the metaphor itself that Matt and I unpacked because our guests don't know it. But they are going to help us understand what we're going to do as we unpack each. Next week we're launching the physical garden. We're going to talk through how that relates to ourselves, our personal selves with us and God, if we are married, and then too with our church community. So we're going to keep going through that. But if you like this, if this is interesting to you, just let us know, and maybe we'll do more of a series on it, Matt. Just more examples, more unpacking how this works in real life, because as we teach it, we're learning it too. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're so grateful for you guys. Again, if you appreciate what we're doing here, don't forget to rate and review. And for all of us here at the Hole in My Heart podcast, guys, Lord willing, we're going to see you next week.